Left behind are the sweet scents of incense and the whispers of the Delphic oracles. In this time, hoplite, the spear's edge dictated destiny, and death's icy scythe danced in every battle, taking brave and cautious alike. Each new sun was a gift, a constant trial burning in the heart of every man and woman of Sparta. Before you settle in, take a moment to give the video a good like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who joins us from all over the world. I am the Night Historian, and my goal is for this story to immerse you in a unique experience while you fall into a good sleep. Open your eyes, comrade. It's the year 480 BC. Xerxes' shadow hangs over our lands. Blink, and let your pupils adjust to the gloom of your communal barracks on the plains of Laconia. The past night, no doubt, was a hard struggle against exhaustion. Banish from your mind the comforts of childhood in your kleros, if you ever knew them. Your rest, with all certainty, lay on a rough straw mattress, or perhaps directly on the beaten earth, sharing body heat with your Sicilia companions to defy the biting cold that seeped under the roof. The symphony of the night was a constant concert. The deep snores of your brothers in arms echoed in the cramped space, mingling with the distant howls of jackals roaming the city outskirts and the metallic clinking of weapons in the wind, perhaps foretelling the arrival of new drills. The air, dense and unpurified, carried an unpleasant mix of odors. From the accumulated sweat after rigorous training to the strong aroma of hardened leather from your shields, and, let's be honest, the emanations from the communal latrines, simple pits that discipline kept out of sight, but not out of smell. The persistent bites of fleas, lice, and other small, salty torments were a perpetual torture, frustrating any attempt to achieve deep, restorative sleep. And in the impenetrable darkness, where imagination runs wild like a chariot without a charioteer, your mind could easily wander to the real and imaginary dangers lurking beyond Sparta's walls. The resentful helots in the fields, hostile tribes lurking at the borders, with their eyes glowing like embers, and even the old legends of mythological beasts and wrathful gods whispered around campfires. Fueled by the crackling wood and dancing shadows, a peaceful sleep was a precious commodity, often interrupted by the bone-chilling cold, the pangs of an uncomfortable bed, and the constant feeling of vulnerability in this land of constant trials. Interestingly, some of our wisest veterans claim that hanging olive and laurel branches at the barracks entrances helps keep these annoying parasites away, though their effectiveness, I fear, is as uncertain as the gods' favor on a day of battle. Your eyelids resist the new day's light as the dry sound of sticks on shields, marking the start of the day in the agoge, cuts through the morning mist with its powerful voice. It's our version of temple bells, only infinitely more martial, and for some impious spirits, equally lacking divine inspiration. Your home is a demarcated section within a communal room, stripped of any vestige of intimacy, where you share the meager living space with your Sicilia, your weapons of war, and a legion of opportunistic insects that seem to have sworn allegiance to the Spartan cause. The stench. Ah, that peculiar mix, a subtle combination of yesterday's sour wine, the acrid scent of sweat after exhausting training, or the fury of combat, the unmistakable aroma of uncurried leather from your sandals, and something else, something you fervently hope isn't the fetid announcement of an infected wound, though deep down in your psyche, you know that's the most likely explanation. Delicate ointments are an unknown luxury in this life dedicated to war, and even if they existed, their soft fragrance would quickly be lost in the whirlwind of odors from this constantly moving camp, a crucible of humanity and sacrifice. You try to stretch your numb limbs, but a harsh creak from your joints reminds you of your mortal condition. You're barely past 20, but in Sparta's relentless calculations, you're already dangerously close to a warrior's maturity. Your back cracks like an old catapult when taut, and your knees sound like two stones clashing in the quarry. The simple act of standing up is an endeavor requiring a firmness of will comparable to a hoplite facing a rain of Persian arrows. The dirt floor beneath your mattress is damp from the night dew that has relentlessly seeped through the simple cover. Or it's covered by a suspicious layer, courtesy of some wandering animal, perhaps a hungry dog, or even an unusually large rat that has sought refuge near your makeshift bed. Either way, the calloused skin of your bare feet is now, unintentionally, part of this peculiar barracks ecosystem, a microcosm of military life. What strange sight greets you in this pale dawn? A few spans away, your closest companions, perhaps some newly arrived young Irenes, who still don't know the unspoken rules of personal space in barracks life, begin to stretch with noisy movements and mourning groans. Forget the intimacy of a private room, a simple blanket offering visual respite to your still bleary eyes, or a moment of solitude to organize the confused thoughts morning brings. Here, existence is intrinsically communal, shared down to the last and most meager portion of the place. Your day dawns in this Sparta, where privacy is a memory as distant as your birth, as an invisible legion of tenacious parasites, curious mice sniffing every corner, and at least 5 other men share your barracks' meager space. And so, immersed in this peculiar cacophony of presences and morning murmurs, your day begins. Believe me, considering the lack of space and constant company, the prospect of an interesting day takes on a very particular meaning. It's fascinating to observe that life in the Spartan barracks was meticulously organized, reflecting military discipline. Rooms were distributed by age and unit, and although personal space was limited, this closeness also fostered camaraderie and a strong sense of belonging among soldiers. Furthermore, the constant presence of other hoplites served as a form of social control and reinforcement of military norms. Curiously, among the younger ranks, it's common for paids to sleep at their mentors' feet, both for nighttime safety and to absorb the rudiments of the art of war and Spartan discipline from their first days in service to the polis. So, with effort and perhaps a morning grunt, you manage to leave your straw mattress. Good for that small victory at dawn. Now, nature's inescapable call makes itself felt. And it's not a polite invitation, but an impatient urge demanding immediate attention, like an ephor demanding obedience. It's in these moments that the nostalgic memory of Tuoikos' spaces begins to bloom in your mind, evoking images of relative cleanliness and privacy. Here you won't find deep, barely contaminated pits, or polished wooden seats, or even the crude fig leaves sometimes used for personal hygiene. In this agoge life, the simple act of relieving yourself is an expedition in itself, a test of stoic endurance, and often a strenuous exercise in patience. It's interesting to know that Spartans, despite their discipline in all areas, had a rather pragmatic view of personal hygiene. The communal life of youths and soldiers focused on endurance and efficiency, rather than comfort or privacy. Archaeological excavations have revealed the presence of communal pits in some settlements, but the daily experience for a hoplite was probably much less hygienic than one might imagine. If your position in the phalanx places you near the rear of the barracks, your private likely consists of a shallow trench dug outside, already dangerously close to capacity due to the previous night's excess diluted wine. consumed to mitigate monotony and cold. The nauseating aroma emanating from it rivals the darkest descriptions of Tartarus. You hold your breath as if carefully advancing through a field sown with spears. You do what necessity demands, and then, here comes the less glorious part of the task. You cover it superficially with displaced earth, praying to Ares that the persistent flies don't follow you with their annoying buzzing to the communal dining hall. The Sycian. If fortune has granted you the privilege of residing near the camp's heart, perhaps you'll find a communal latrine, a crude wooden structure shared by dozens of men. There you can experience the pleasant company of unknown faces sitting side by side, in an uncomfortable silence interrupted only by the inevitable sounds of human physiology. Perhaps you'll even venture to exchange a murmured complaint about the poor quality of the melena zomos, the black broth, but I strongly advise you to avoid inhaling deeply the surrounding air, laden with unhealthy effluvia. It is curious that even in these precarious circumstances, some of our most veteran gerontes insist on maintaining a regulated distance between improvised latrines and precarious water sources, although the effectiveness of this measure is, at best, debatable, given the ephemeral nature of our military settlements in hostile territory. Forget freshly squeezed grape juice or comforting warm goat's milk. Here, mid-morning, if you possess any precise method of measuring the passage of time beyond the sun's position, what scrapes roughly down your dry throat is diluted wine. Yes, wine. The reason? Simple and chilling. Untreated water is a breeding ground for a myriad of invisible parasites and all kinds of filth, carriers of diseases that can decimate an entire company. So you start the day with watered-down wine, low in alcohol, but high in the crucial task of keeping you alive in this unhealthy environment. The helots also drink it. No one particularly enthuses over its earthy, bitter taste, but at least it offers a reasonable probability of not succumbing to dysentery in the short term. Do you long for a piece of roasted meat or a piece of aged cheese? You can allow yourself to dream of such delicacies. Such delicacies are reserved for the feasts of the ephors and perhaps some special celebration in honor of Lycurgus, and only if the quartermaster feels particularly generous that day. Most lower-ranking hoplites taste meat only a few times a year on campaign, an ephemeral luxury in a life dedicated to Sparta's service and the harshness of war. As for fresh fruit, only when Mother Earth decides to offer it in season, and always with the caution that it hasn't spontaneously fermented into a kind of primitive and dangerous wine. And don't even dare to think about spices, unless noble blood runs in your veins. A simple pinch of black pepper can cost more than your meager ration of cereals. Salt is such a precious commodity that it's locked away in the Polemark storerooms, as if it were gold dust, so you chew your rock-hard barley bread, swallow your morning diluted wine, and make a conscious effort not to imagine the weevils that might have been gnawing at your meager ration overnight. Lunch doesn't energize you. It simply happens, like an inevitable event in the day's monotony. And now that you're properly nourished, or malnourished, depending on your perspective, the task of preparing for imminent battle or a long march awaits you, as if your life depended on it. Because indeed, it does. The figure of Lycurgus was central to a Spartan's life. Lycurgus was not an emperor, but a mythical, or semi-mythical, legislator of Sparta. He is credited with creating the Great Retra, a set of laws and customs that established the Spartan constitution and its rigid military and social system. Although his historical existence is debated, his figure was an object of veneration and absolute loyalty by the Spartans. Military victories, celebrations, and sometimes even the distribution of rewards or food were carried out in his name, reinforcing his image as benefactor and undisputed leader of their way of life. Once you've finished your sad and meager breakfast of the era, it's time to get dressed. Not that clothes will give you much comfort, by the way. Your wardrobe consists exactly of a single campaign outfit. Just one. It's a rough wool chiton that chafes and weighs you down, or padded armor you've worn every day for months, perhaps even years. Forget seasonal fashions, or the thrill of wearing something new. Here, the only fashion is wearing what you have until it falls apart from use, or gives you a rather unpleasant skin rash. Underwear is optional. If you're lucky, perhaps you have a linen undershirt. If not, well, you'll go directly under layers of rough, sweaty wool, all carefully sewn by some camp artisan who probably had little idea of what a decent seam should look like. There's no personal laundress either, no perfumed soap, and, of course, not the slightest chance of finding a dry cleaner. So your clothes are inevitably dirty, stiff with accumulated grime, and smell like a poorly ventilated stable after a sandstorm. Even if you wanted to wash your clothes, it wouldn't be easy. You'd have to carry water from the nearest river, or, well, painstakingly heat it over a smoky campfire, scrub your padded garment against a rough stone, perhaps using some ash or clay as detergent, and then hang it in the sun. A sun that deigns to appear, hopefully, a few days a month in this harsh land. And don't even get me started on footwear. If you're lucky enough to have some kind of protection for your feet, it will probably be pieces of raw leather, barely sewn together, giving you about as much support as a slippery banana peel. Most soldiers simply walk in their Spartan sandals, worn by sticky mud, omnipresent dung, and what we might call Laconian minefields, also known as dangerous sharp rocks and stagnant puddles full of invisible diseases. All this translates into a single painful truth. Your skin hates you. You feel a constant, unbearable itch. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs have set up permanent, free mono on your body. Everyone suffers equally. Noble hippies, officers in their attire, young paids in their new clothes, all are basically walking insect farms. No one escapes this plague. It's perfectly normal to scratch your armpit with the hilt of a Cephas, a Spartan sword, while talking to the camp priest, and no one will even bat an eye at something so common. Your skin is irritated by the constant rubbing of your uniform's rough fabrics. Your scalp is a true battlefield full of inflamed bites, and if you're unlucky enough to have a rash, well, bad luck. There's no camp doctor specializing in skin problems, no miracle cure, no one who can tell you you probably have scabies. You simply continue to suffer in silence. And if you have the incredible fortune not to contract an infection from this, great. That rash will simply become your inseparable companion for the next few months, an unwanted Spartan guest who will accompany you every step of your miserable life on campaign. It is interesting to note that Spartan military footwear, though sturdy, offered little protection against the elements and parasites, making skin and foot problems a common ailment among hoplites. The discipline and austerity of Spartan life implied an acceptance of these discomforts as part of training and service. Now that you're dressed in campaign rags and wrapped in constant biting discomfort, it's time to go out and perform your duties to extreme exhaustion. Now that you're fully arrayed in itches and damp wool, perhaps it would be appropriate to display a radiant morning smile. Except you won't. Because in this era, smiling is a dangerous game, not because of your feelings, but because of your teeth. No toothpick, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no delicate dental floss exists. The idea of mouth cleaning is as common as the idea of bathing often on campaign. That is, almost non-existent. Some might chew a fibrous twig or rinse their mouth with diluted vinegar, But most of the time, your teeth are abandoned to their fate and are not doing well at all. By the time you're in your 20s, your smile will have the ghostly charm of something fresh from a haunted tomb. Cavities are very common, mercilessly destroying enamel. Gums are swollen and inflamed, an unhealthy red-purple color, and those dark spots on your teeth are not just food debris. That's advanced decay, the slow but sure decomposition of your dentition. You have more rot in your mouth than a forgotten medieval basement full of spoiled vegetables. Sugar, though not yet something a hoplite eats every day, is sometimes found in special military rations or what is taken from the enemy. Since it's brought from afar and costs a lot, it's mainly used in small sweets or as a flashy way to show wealth among Spartan kings or gerontes. If you are of noble birth, congratulations. You will ruin your teeth much faster than your humble hoplite companions, perioi koi or helots. If you are of humble origin, the damage will be slower but constant, caused by hard barley bread, salted meat, and years of difficult chewing. Toothaches will become normal in your life. Get used to them. They are like the weather in this land, always present, a constant reminder of how hard life is. It's the kind of throbbing pain that will make you seriously consider praying fervently to the gods, drowning your sorrows in more camp wine, or, in an act of desperation, trying to pull your tooth out yourself with crude blacksmith's tongs. And this is not a joke. That was a real treatment in times of great need. Dentists as a profession do not exist in the army, but healers or artisans who sometimes assist with pain do. Yes, the same person who cuts your hair with dull scissors also pulls teeth by dim candlelight, using an iron hook and no anesthesia whatsoever. If you have an infected tooth, I hope you enjoy high fevers, because without the wonder of modern antibiotics, a simple dental infection can easily become very serious and send you to an early grave from a simple toothache. That's right. What sends us to the camp medicine tent today could, in this campaign, be the start of your own funeral. Understood. Here is the next section of the story, adapted to the life of a Spartan soldier, maintaining the rawness and immersive style we seek. The feat of the hoplite, a constant battle. And don't even get me started on footwear. If you're lucky enough to have some kind of protection for your feet, they'll probably be pieces of raw leather, barely sewn together, giving you about as much support as a slippery banana peel. Most soldiers simply walk in their Spartan sandals, worn by sticky mud, ubiquitous dung, and what we might call Laconian minefields, also known as dangerous sharp rocks and stagnant puddles filled with invisible diseases. All this translates into a single and painful truth. Your skin hates you. You feel a constant, unbearable itch. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs have established permanent, free homes on your body. Everyone suffers equally. Noble hippias, officers in their attire, young paids in their new clothes, all are basically walking insect farms. No one is safe from this plague. It's perfectly normal to scratch your armpit with the hilt of a Cephas, a Spartan sword, while talking to the camp priest, and no one will even bat an eye at something so common. Your skin is irritated by the constant rubbing of your uniform's rough fabrics. Your scalp is a true battlefield full of inflamed bites. And if you have the misfortune of having a rash, well, tough luck. There's no camp doctor specializing in skin problems, no miracle cure, no one who can tell you probably have scabies. You simply continue to suffer in silence. And if you have the incredible fortune of not contracting an infection from this, great. That rash will simply become your inseparable companion for the next few months. An unwanted Spartan guest who will accompany you every step of your miserable life on campaign. It is interesting to note that Spartan military footwear, although resistant, offered little protection against the elements and parasites, making skin and foot problems a common ailment among hoplites. The discipline and austerity of Spartan life implied an acceptance of these discomforts as part of training and service. The Spartan warriors smile. Now that you are dressed in campaign rags and wrapped in constant biting discomfort, it is time to go out and fulfill your duties to extreme exhaustion. Now that you are fully attired in itches and damp wool, perhaps it would be appropriate to display a radiant morning smile. Except you won't, because in this era, smiling is a dangerous game, not because of your feelings, but because of your teeth. There is no toothpick, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no delicate dental floss. The idea of oral hygiene is as common as the idea of bathing regularly on campaign. That is, almost non-existent. Some might chew a fibrous twig or rinse their mouth with diluted vinegar, but most of the time, your teeth are abandoned to their fate and are not doing well at all. By the time you are in your 20s, your smile will have the ghostly charm of something recently exhumed from a haunted tomb. Cavities are very common, mercilessly destroying enamel. Gums are swollen and inflamed, and an unhealthy red-purple color. And those dark spots on your teeth are not just food remnants. That is advanced deterioration, the slow but sure decomposition of your dentition. You have more rot in your mouth than a forgotten medieval basement full of spoiled vegetables. Sugar, although not yet something a hoplite eats every day, is sometimes found in special military occasions or in what is snatched from the enemy. As it is brought from afar and costs a lot, it is used mainly in small sweets or as a flashy way to show wealth among Spartan kings or gerontes. If you are of noble birth, congratulations. You will be able to ruin your teeth much faster than your humble hoplite companions, perioikoi or helots. If you are of humble origin, the damage will be slower, but constant, caused by hard barley bread, salted meat, and years of strenuous chewing. Toothaches will become a normal part of your life. Get used to them. They are like the weather of this land, always present, a constant reminder of how hard life is. It is the kind of throbbing pain that will make you seriously consider praying fervently to the gods, drowning your sorrows in more camp wine, or, in an act of desperation, trying to pull your tooth out yourself with crude blacksmith's tongs. And this is not a joke. That was a real treatment in times of great need. Dentists as a profession do not exist in the army, but healers or artisans who sometimes assist with the pain do. Yes, the same person who cuts your hair with dull scissors also pulls teeth by dim candlelight, using an iron hook and without any kind of anesthesia. If you have an infected tooth, I hope you enjoy high fevers, because without the wonder of modern antibiotics, a simple dental infection can easily become something very serious and lead you to the grave prematurely from a simple toothache. That's right. What makes us go to the camp medicine tent today could, in this campaign, be the beginning of your own funeral. The hoplites work, from dawn to dusk. And social life doesn't offer much comfort either. Kissing, good luck with that. Bad breath that morning, evening, and night breath that could knock down a Persian is everywhere. If you're single, how attractive you are isn't measured by how white your smile is, but by your bravery in battle, the quality of your spear and shield, and the severity of your training. In short, your mouth is a constant battlefield and is losing the war spectacularly. Now that you feel the pangs of your battered teeth, let's go outside. Because your real work, the one that will bend your back until it curves, is just beginning. It's time to fulfill your duties. Except there's no office with a view, no tidy desk, no break for stale wine to revive you, not the slightest chance of a quick career of honors. Your job, if you're a hoplite of Sparta, is to serve the police with loyalty and valor. You rise with the first rays of the sun and stop only when it hides behind the hills of this foreign land. Your tools, your dory, spear, your xiphus, short sword, and your aspis, shield, plus the armor you wear. There's no concept of rest days, no marked quitting time. There's only the relentless cycle from dawn to dusk, day after day. Perhaps you'll have a day off to recover from battles or long marches, but only if your polemarch deems it necessary. The work is brutal, a constant test of endurance. You march for miles under the scorching heat, fight fierce enemies, stand guard during long cold nights, and participate in the agoge exercises. No one cares if you're exhausted to the bone. No one asks how your mind is. Those are concerns of poets or idle philosophers. It's interesting to remember that Spartan discipline was legendary. Hoplites underwent constant and rigorous training from childhood in the agoge that prepared them to withstand the harsh conditions of campaign. This discipline, imposed by the paidonomoi and reinforced by a strict code of conduct, was fundamental to the effectiveness of the Spartan army on the battlefield. Well, if fortune, or misfortune, depending on how you look at it, has assigned you the female gender, or you are a perioikos following the army as a supplier or servant. Surprise, your workday is not limited to camp care. You also have the slight task of caring for the wounded, often horrific scenes, washing soldiers' clothes, a losing battle against blood and mud, cooking, often with scarce and questionable rations, helping maintain order in the camp, and pretending that the inevitable soldier lice infestation is not slowly but surely spreading to your side of the tent. Children begin helping around 7 or 8 years old. No school, no toys to distract them from harsh reality. Just small tasks to perform, and the grim dream of perhaps someday not dying from an infected wound or a camp disease. And if you are one of the lucky few not directly involved in quartermaster duties, perhaps you are an artisan who travels with the army, like a blacksmith, saddler, or carpenter. Great. Still, your day is spent working with scorching fire, smelly cured leather, or heavy wood, all in makeshift workshops where inhaling smoke and splinters is part of the work landscape. The salary is basically the promise of army protection and the opportunity to sell your goods. Job benefits include occasional burns, the possibility of cutting yourself with sharp tools, and, generally, a good dose of bad luck. Do you have a fever? Drink some warm wine, the same you drank last night, and keep working. You can't afford to stop, not even for a day, because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat enough, this army has a very simple solution for that. Be replaced by someone more needy. So you grab your hammer, ignore the blisters blooming on your hands, and keep forging, because in this campaign, your work is not a career. It's a grueling, slow-motion endurance test, where the ultimate prize is simply living another day to repeat it all. It is important to remember that, while Spartan women had a unique and valued role in society, they did not accompany armies on campaign as Roman women did. Therefore, I have adapted this section to refer to perioikoi, or helots, and women who, in some way, joined the forces as providers of essential services in the camp. Their work was essential for the army's functioning, from caring for the sick to maintaining equipment and preparing food. Their presence, though sometimes seen as a logistical burden, was an integral part of campaign life. Now that your back burns with the memory of working in the fields, let's talk about the weather, that capricious master who rules our lives. Because in this campaign, the temperature is less about defined seasons and more about a continuous test sent from the heavens. Let's start with winter in these distant lands. There is no insulation in your barracks walls, no constant campfire offering respite from the biting cold, no waterproof roofs to keep out moisture. Only crude wooden or adobe walls with gaps where the icy mountain wind seeps through. Your windows are simple openings, covered with torn scraps of cloth, not the transparent luxury of glass from your home. The fire in the brazier, pleasant in theory, often reduces to a few dying embers, as there isn't always enough dry wood to keep it burning constantly. Firewood is a precious commodity in this desolate land. You wrap yourself in your single damp wool cloak, huddle as close as possible to the scarce embers, and still, you wake up with the tip of your nose dangerously cold. Your feet are permanently frozen, often wet from moisture seeping from the ground. Your toes become numb to the point that they resemble small pieces of ancient ice, rigid and insensitive. Frostbite is not precisely diagnosed. It's simply considered bad luck or an inevitable consequence of winter on campaign. Spartan military campaigns often extended across diverse regions with extreme climates. Hoplites had to endure everything from the suffocating heat of the Greek summer to the glacial cold of the mountains. The lack of adequate clothing and equipment for these extreme conditions was a constant source of suffering and casualties, even without facing the enemy. Historical sources mention how Spartans were accustomed to hardship and considered suffering part of their discipline. Now let's fast forward to summer in this scorching land. Sounds better, right? Incorrect. In summer, your humble communal barracks transforms into a suffocating oven. There's no fan to move the stale air, no refreshing currents, and, of course, absolutely no perfume to mitigate the effects of heat and sweat. You sweat profusely through your multiple layers of chiton, and, if you wear it, your linen or bronze armor, but you cannot take them off completely, as showing too much skin is not proper for a hoplite, and furthermore, it exposes you to painful sunburn, ravenous insect bites, and the relentless judgment of your more puritanical companions. Flies are everywhere, irresistibly drawn to your unwashed body, and the persistent aroma of yesterday's salted meat that still permeates the air. Mosquitoes buzz insistently near your ears as you try to fall asleep, assuming you can sleep with the chorus of your companion's snores and the occasional shouts of sentinels. Under the scorching sun of this land, you roast mercilessly, with no sunscreen to protect you, no proper helmet to completely cover you, unless you have improvised something crude with cloth or leather. And worst of all, you still have to perform your duties under this inclement sun. Heat stroke is not diagnosed. It's simply considered having a bad day or indisposition. So, for most of the year, you are either shivering in your own damp misery, wondering if your toes will survive until spring, or you are sweating profusely under your armor, while chafing causes you painful abrasions. And the only thing that never changes, regardless of the season, is that your clothes still itch relentlessly, your food is still bland, and your next guard duty or battle still awaits, relentless and inevitable. Welcome to climate control, a Gauge style. There is no such thing. Do you feel your throat rough? Do you long for a breath of fresh air? Do you wish to splash your face with cold water to wake up from this damp nightmare that is campaign life? Bad luck. In this era, water is not always your friend. In fact, sometimes, it is silently conspiring to send you to an early grave. Let's start with the basics. Drinking. That nearby stream may seem tempting, bubbling and crystal clear, evoking idyllic images from Homeric songs. But warning, do not be fooled. Upstream, it is very likely that someone has washed their dirty clothes, or even disposed of the remains of some dead animal. And if not that, perhaps invisible parasites, a myriad of bacteria, and the entire microbial army of this land await in every seemingly innocent sip. This is why people resorted to camp wine, even if watered down, even children. The fermentation process and the low alcohol content made it much safer than any cloudy liquid flowing through the camp ditches. Well, water was a better option, if the camp had one, and it was relatively clean. Curiously, priests or elders who often accompanied the campaigns were experts in water management and sometimes built rudimentary filtration systems, although these were rare luxuries in the heat of the campaign. And what about bathing? Surely water was used for personal cleaning, right? In theory, yes. In practice, a resounding no for most. You see, although Spartans were known for their rigor, they did not have elaborate baths like the Romans. On campaign, there was a curious belief among some hoplites. Bathing actually opened the skin's pores, allowing dreaded diseases to enter the body without resistance. That's right, washing was considered a medically risky activity by some. One was supposed to remain cleaner, apparently, if one never shed that protective dirt firmly adhered to the skin. Were there improvised baths in some larger camps? Yes. Often, pits barely filled with sun-heated water. But they quickly gained a reputation for being hotbeds of disease and, at times, unsavory activities. So, naturally, the ephors, or pedonomoi, always vigilant of morality, intervened and discouraged such practices, recalling the virtues of discipline and endurance over bodily indulgence. Even if the idea of a bath assailed you, it was a whole logistical production. You would need to carry heavy water from the source or river, laboriously heat it over a smoky campfire, fill a wooden tub that probably leaked more than it held, and then pray fervently to the gods that no one else in the camp used it before you, or, even worse, after, contaminating your precious bath. And then there was rainwater, diligently collected in open barrels, where birds left their contributions, insects bred at will, and moss thrived in a damp, dark environment. Sounds refreshing, right? So, whether it enters your mouth, wets your body, or washes your armor, water in this campaign was less a source of life than a dangerous gamble. One wrong sip, and you could spend your last days sweating feverishly on your straw mattress, writhing in abdominal pain, and mentally reviewing all the questionable decisions that led you to this point. Next time you drink from your canteen, raise an imaginary glass to our ancestors. They didn't have the luxury of safe hydration, so they drank the water. Or perhaps they didn't. Perhaps they simply stubbed their toe on a disappointment-shaped rock. Either way, you're sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Bad luck? You live in the era of Spartan splendor, where campaign medicine is in essence a form of courteous torture adorned with uncertain herbal remedies and prayers. Let's start with diagnosis, the basis of all treatment. Any ailment that affects you, be it a simple cough, a suspicious skin rash, a broken bone from a clumsy fall, or the dreaded plague that decimates the polis, is invariably attributed to an imbalance in your humors. These four humors, pillars of medicine at the time, were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to the science of the time, your health depended on maintaining these bodily fluids in a precarious harmony, like a kind of perfectly balanced internal soup. Do you have a fever? Clearly, an excess of blood is consuming you. The logical answer: a good bleeding. That's right. Let's drain your life force into a bowl using a dull blade or a hungry leech that hasn't tasted a bite in many days. And yes, barbers often performed this delicate procedure on campaign. Imagine going to get your beard trimmed and ending up losing a good amount of blood in the same session. 2 for 1, comrade. Do you feel sad or anxious? Evidently, you suffer from an excess of black bile, the prescribed cure, potent laxatives, perhaps a hot herbal purge of dubious efficacy, or simply fervent prayers and a cold compress on your forehead, while everyone around you discreetly avoids eye contact and begins to carve your funeral pyre. Now, if you have the misfortune to break a bone or suffer a deep, nasty wound in battle, you're in serious trouble. There is no anesthesia, unless you count the possibility of fainting from pain as a form of temporary relief. Surgery, if it can be called that, is performed with knives that probably haven't been cleaned since the last skirmish. Tools are often heated over a fire, not for sterilization purposes. That concept is still far from understood, but because they simply look more intimidating that way. Antibiotics are a distant dream, centuries away in the future. Germ theory, fundamental to understanding the spread of diseases in the camp, has not yet been conceived. Instead, is it believed that illness comes from stale air? Or is it a manifestation of divine displeasure at your obvious moral failings? Does your stomach hurt? Must your sinful thoughts be to blame? I hope you enjoy confessing your transgressions while vomiting incessantly. If your condition worsens despite these treatments, chances are you'll be treated with more eager leeches, perhaps some crushed beetles with unknown medicinal properties, and the comforting presence of a priest by your side, administering the last rites just in case. At this point, everyone is preparing for the definitive cure: death. And if by some inexplicable miracle you recover, everyone will simply assume that Apollo had pity on your soul. The camp healer will take full credit for the healing, and the leech will be promoted to a position of greater prestige. So yes, in this campaign, medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure itself. It is important to remember that medicine in ancient Greece, including Sparta, was largely based on theories such as that of the humors, popularized by figures like Hippocrates, although practices varied. Although Spartans valued physical strength, their practical medical knowledge on campaign for serious wounds and infectious diseases was limited, which made treatments often ineffective, and survival depended more on the individual's constitution than on medical intervention. After a long day of arduous service, plagued by flea bites and the unpleasant sensation of the leech. If you were lucky enough to receive medical treatment, it's finally mealtime at the camp. You return to your section of the communal barracks with aching feet and a stomach roaring like a hungry lion, longing for a soldier's only joy, a hot meal. Bad news. Once again, your food is probably conspiring to join the widespread plot to shorten your existence. Let's start with the basics. Food preservation is practically non-existent on campaign. There's no refrigerator to keep food fresh, no freezer to stop decomposition, only salted meat, hard bread, and the fervent hope that the weather won't spoil the meager provisions. Your meat, if you're fortunate enough to receive a ration, will have hung for days, adorned with a cloud of buzzing flies, immersed in a brine of dubious origin, and possibly discreetly shared with some hungry camp rat. Barley bread is the cornerstone of the Spartan army's diet, the basis of almost all meals. But even this humble source of sustenance is not without dangers. Although Spartans were disciplined, on campaign, the quality of bread could vary enormously. Sometimes, the soldiers' bread arrived rock hard, other times moldy from humidity. If harvests were poor or supply lines were interrupted, it was rumored that bread was mixed with bran or even sand to increase volume. An interesting fact is that the famous Melena zomos, or Spartan black broth, though legendary for its austerity, was a constant source of protein and energy, albeit its taste was notoriously unpleasant. Vegetables are only available when season and logistics permit. And do you know what is almost always in season in rations? Salted meat and hard bread. Countless portions of salted meat and hard bread, boiled to satiety, reduced to a bland stew, or suspiciously floating in a mysterious pottage that, if you recall from previous chapters, is basically a hot swamp of unidentified ingredients that has been simmering since before you joined the agoge. Some dried fruit may be available, but it spoils quickly in the warm climate. And sugar, that white, granulated luxury, is rare, expensive, and hoarded by kings or ephors, who use it mainly to show off their teeth blackened by excessive consumption. Dairy is another risky bet on campaign. Fresh milk sours in a matter of hours. Under the sun, butter and cheese last a little longer, but are often laden with invisible bacteria. People consume them anyway, because frankly, the alternative is chewing the sole of their worn-out boot. And let's talk about condiments. Spices like black pepper, aromatic cinnamon, or exotic nutmeg are worth more than gold to the average hoplite. For them, flavor comes mainly from onions, if they are lucky, salt, if they are even luckier, and perhaps a pinch of bitter resignation. Most meals taste like a piece of soaked leather sprinkled with a generous dose of sadness. But food is not just a health hazard. It's also a delicate logistical matter in the Spartan army. Rations depend on supply and are sometimes scarce. If you're caught stealing food, you could be severely punished by the ephors or polemarchs of the camp. That's right, your dinner could literally lead to floggings. So, as you sit to consume your grayish stew by the flickering light of a campfire, remember that every bite is a potential risk. But you eat anyway, because in this campaign, food doesn't always nourish. Often, it simply tests you. The day draws to a close. You've worked to exhaustion, suffered the inclemencies of the day, and barely managed to digest that questionable ration that served as your dinner. You might think the day's tribulations are over, but don't allow yourself complete relaxation, because in this Spartan army, the omnipresent gaze of the Olympian gods encompasses everything. So does that of the local priest, whose moral judgment weighs on each of your actions, not to mention your most pious companions, whose murmurs would not hesitate to point out any deviation from the straight path. In this Spartan world, you now inhabit in your campaign dreams, religion is not simply an aspect of life. It is life itself, the fundamental structure that sustains everything, from the Delphic oracles to the offerings to Ares before each battle. Spartan religion exercises iron control over every facet of your existence in this campaign. Your calendar is marked by religious festivals. The laws of the Retra are imbued with traditional Spartan morality. Your education, if you were fortunate enough to learn letters, is shaped by the wisdom of the Gerontes and the tales of myths, and your birth, marriage, death, and everything that happens between these milestones is irrevocably linked to religious rites and precepts. Think of the gods as your spiritual guides, a constant presence watching over the destiny of Sparta and its phalanxes. Each day is rigidly structured around offerings and prayers made at dawn, midday, and nightfall, not as a simple reminder, but as an obligation to maintain peace with the gods. Neglecting the rites means risking the polis's fortune. forgetting to make a libation when passing an altar dedicated to an impious deity, dishonoring the customs of the ancestors, sacrilege, allowing impure thoughts to disturb the harmony of your mind, a lack of discipline that could incur divine displeasure. And yes, the underworld, the place of the dead, is a tangible reality, vividly described in tales and popular beliefs. There are talks of rivers of fire, fields of suffering, and the relentless judgment of the gods upon the souls of the wicked. If the threat of the Persians doesn't instill fear in you, the prospect of a grim fate in the afterlife surely will. You have the possibility of knowing the sacred texts and inscriptions in the temples, although their interpretation often falls to priests and learned men. Do you rely on tradition and transmitted wisdom to understand the world around you and your place in it? This means that if the omens are unfavorable before a battle, it's time to redouble offerings and prayers to appease the gods. Taxes and contributions to the temple are necessary to maintain divine favor. Festivals are sacred days, and the Spartan calendar is full of them. Although they offer a welcome respite from strenuous military service, they are not occasions for unrestrained joy. Attending rituals in the camp chapel, participating in processions, making sacrifices, and constantly reminding yourself that virtue are fundamental Spartan values. These are the appropriate activities for these days of rest. Questioning the authority of religious tradition is a dangerous act. Those who challenge divine powers can attract the gods' wrath upon themselves and the phalanx. So you follow the imposed formalities. You sing hymns, bow reverently, pray fervently for your soul, after enduring this earthly existence full of deprivations on campaign, to finally reach the Elysian fields. Assuming, of course, that you manage to remain in grace with the divine designs and customs of Sparta. It is fascinating to know that Spartans had a deep connection with their deities, especially Ares, the god of war, and Artemis, venerated at the sanctuary of Orthia. Omens and oracles influenced military and political decisions, showing the deep connection between daily life and religious belief. Curiously, the omnipresence of religion also manifested itself in the daily life of the camp in unexpected ways. For example, the sacred horns that sometimes accompanied the army not only marked rituals, but could also serve as a warning of enemy attacks or to signal the beginning and end of communal tasks, all under the watchful eye of Sparta's protective gods. If you thought the life of a Spartan hoplite was tough, imagine living that same existence in the skin of a woman in Spartan society. All the dirt, constant hunger, and omnipresent fear, plus the endless cycle of childbirth and a different, but equally oppressive social brutality. In Sparta, being a woman was to walk a paved road full of obstacles, with hardly any resources to lighten the burden, but with a purpose and strength that distinguished them from other Greek women. From the moment of their birth, a Spartan girl's destiny was largely laid out. To train physically, to marry, to procreate future warriors, and to serve the polis through her role as mother and wife, without rest. Education was a possibility, but focused on physical and moral strength to bear healthy children for Sparta. Marriage occurred at a later age than in other Greek cities, often around 18 or 20. It was not about romantic love or personal affinity, but about ensuring the continuity of the warrior line and the stability of the polis. Her opinion on the matter was, at best, irrelevant in the choice, but her role was of great importance. Once married, her primary duty was to produce strong male heirs who would secure the Spartan lineage, maintain the oikos in a functional state, and, above all, not complain, as any show of discontent could lead to them being considered weak. Childbirth was a deadly lottery with alarming odds. There was no prenatal care, no sterilized instruments, not the slightest bit of anesthesia to relieve the excruciating pain. Midwives did their best with the limited knowledge of the time, but even minor complications could mean certain death for the mother, the newborn, or both. Some women managed to survive 10 or more pregnancies, but many did not survive the first. But don't worry, once the father came into the world, their workload only increased. Now they had a screaming newborn in a simple home and were expected to constantly breastfeed, cook for everyone, clean up dirt, continue helping with hard field tasks, often managing the kleros in the absence of men, and also attend to their husbands' needs. They had no rest. They were the rest for everyone else. If they were unmarried, they were objects of suspicion. If they were widows, they were considered vulnerable and easy prey, although in Sparta they could inherit property. If they were too frank or independent, they were considered dangerous and subversive, despite the relative freedom they enjoyed compared to other Greek women. Even in the religious sphere, their role was limited and subordinate, although some women achieved great influence as priestesses of certain cults or through their exemplary piety. In short, if they were women in Sparta, they were expected to endure deprivations in silence, obey the polis's rules without question, reproduce diligently, and suffer with resignation, ideally with a smile on their lips, because even in a time of universal suffering, somehow women were expected to suffer with grace and posture for the sake of Sparta. It is important to remember that Spartan women enjoyed unusual freedom and physical education in ancient Greece, but their main purpose remained procreation and household management for the polis. Their presence, though not directly in military campaigns like Roman women, was crucial to the functioning of Spartan society. If you are listening to me at this point in the video, I hope you are already subscribed to the channel. I am the Knight Historian, and my wish is to have a huge community of people who love knights and knowledge, thousands of people from all over the world connected by that intrinsic desire to know more, to be able to know oneself better and have a better life. I always say and emphasize that knowing history is fundamental so as not to repeat the mistakes of the past. And that is why I want you to take a few seconds to subscribe and share this video with your knowledge-loving friend. Let's continue with the story. So far you have fought against the omnipresent camp dirt, corrosive hunger, blatant social injustice, and perhaps even a recalcitrant heelot. But just when you think your day can't get any worse, raw, ruthless violence erupts onto the scene, noisy, bloody, and often completely acceptable by brutal Spartan standards. Let's be clear, Sparta was not a time of constant peace and harmony. The notion of law and order mainly meant hoping that the ephors didn't wake up on the wrong side of the bed that day. Violence lurks everywhere, within the agoge, in skirmishes with helots, in disputes over spoils, in quarrels among hoplites over honor, and sometimes even in line for a barley bread ration. Crime was a daily reality. Punishment was brutal and exemplary, and justice resembled a macabre public spectacle more than a system for protecting rights. If you stole a measly loaf of bread to feed your hunger, you could be flogged to exhaustion. If you were accused of lying, you could be subjected to the crypteia, a certainly effective Spartan correction that tested you in unimaginable ways. Let's say you're accused of something even more serious: sedition, treason, or dishonor in battle. How do you prove your innocence against such accusations? By being subjected to torture, obviously. Welcome to trial by ordeal, a peculiar form of justice administration that, although more associated with later periods, had its equivalents in early Greek practices and the mentality of the time. One of its variants consisted of being subjected to extreme physical endurance tests. If you survived, you were considered innocent by divine intervention or by your own arete. If not, you were guilty and faced the consequences. Another equally just option was to be thrown into a body of water. If you sank, you were considered innocent, though probably drowned. If you floated, you were guilty and would be punished anyway. It's like participating in a Spartan contest, where the prize is survival, and the host is actively against you. And if you are condemned to death, prepare for a multitudinous public event. Executions are carried out before enthusiastically cheering crowds. Being thrown into a ravine, stoning, or fighting to the death. Sometimes, people even bring food to enjoy the spectacle. It's the Spartan equivalent of public entertainment. Domestic violence was completely normalized and even considered acceptable within the bounds of discipline. Husbands were permitted, and even expected in some circles, to discipline their wives and children through physical punishments, always with the aim of fostering virtue and obedience to the polis. Street fights were common and could be triggered by the slightest provocation. You could be beaten simply for looking at a Hippias's horse the wrong way. And then there's war, always latent on the horizon. Skirmishes with the helots, territorial disputes, expansion campaigns instigated by the two kings and the Apella. There is always someone marching with the intention of stabbing another with a spear in the name of Sparta, of the gods, or simply out of pure necessity or ambition. Violence is not a rupture of the social order in Sparta. It is, in many ways, part of its fabric. Everyone lives with the constant knowledge that life is fragile and ephemeral. Justice is arbitrary, and your comrade in arms could strike you for a trivial dispute over an extra ration. So walk carefully, keep your gaze down, and never trust anyone who wields a cephas with too kind a smile. But the day of battle arrived. The air you breathe has transformed into a dense and nauseating soup, a repulsive mixture of the sour stench of the icy sweat of thousands of men on the verge of collapse, the metallic and sweet aroma of blood now soaking the earth like a crimson rain, the bestial reek of panicked horses, their eyes bloodshot, and the dense dust raised by the massive charge that envelops you in a reddish haze, blinding you for crucial moments. The Spartan war cry, a visceral roar emanating from the depths of thousands of throats, a unison that rises above the pandemonium, explodes in your ears like divine thunder, a torrent of Laconian fury that propels you forward, spurring your companion with a savage determination. You feel the might of the formation, the furious undulation of bodies beneath your legs, as you launch with untamed power towards the imposing wall of enemy steel. A forest of dories, spears, and xiphoi, short swords, shining menacingly under the relentless sun of this foreign land, and the enemy standards that bear down on you like a relentless storm. The sun, a disk of fire in the sky, reflects off the sharp blades of Persian scimitars, dazzling and disorienting you at critical moments. But through fleeting glimpses, you glimpse the deadly gleam of the curved weapons, dancing like hungry jaws ready to tear, and the dark, fierce eyes of unwavering fanaticism, and an ancestral fury, watching you with visceral hatred, promising a violent death. The clash is cataclysmic, a deafening explosion that shakes you to the bones, the horrendous crunch of spear wood, splintering under the brutal pressure of impact, the sharp, prolonged screech of metal against metal, as swords and shields collide with savage force, and the dull, repulsive sound of flesh, tearing under the sharp, cold point of steel. You feel the tremor run through every fiber of your being as your dory, spear, firm in your gloved hand and guided by your unwavering will, finds a deadly crevice in the enemy defense, a weak point between the hardened leather plates and breastplates. You perceive the dry, satisfying impact as it pierces armor and the flesh beneath. A fleeting, soft resistance before your adversary's body collapses lifelessly, leaving behind a momentary void in the chaotic maelstrom surrounding you. But there is no time to celebrate this small, solitary victory. Another Persian warrior, his face disfigured by fury and his scimitar held high, describes a menacing arc towards your head. You react purely by survival instinct, raising your aspis, shield of wood reinforced with bronze, just in time to deflect the fatal blow. The impact shakes your arm to the shoulder, but the wood resists, splintering but not yielding. With a quick and fluid movement of your heavy xiphus, short sword, you seek a vulnerable point in his defense, a gap in his adorned breastplate, or the narrow slit of his helmet. The din of battle has become an infernal symphony that completely envelops you. The agonizing cries of the wounded writhing in the mud, the guttural oaths of enraged combatants, the constant metallic clash of thousands of weapons, interweaving in a deadly dance, the agonizing whinnying of wounded horses falling to the ground, their legs convulsively kicking, and the dull cry of men exhaling their last breath. Around you, men fall like reaped stalks, comrades with the lambda insignia, the symbol of Laconia, soaked in blood, and enemies with their exotic standards shattered, all in a whirlwind of blind and random violence where skill and luck intertwine in an uncertain fate. The ground beneath the combatants' sandals has transformed into a crimson quagmire, a thick, slippery mud that hinders every advance, every desperate maneuver to maintain balance and life. You feel the suffocating heat of your linen or bronze breastplate, a prison of linen and metal that slowly bakes you under the relentless sun. Sweat runs down your forehead and fogs your vision through the narrow slit of your helmet, stinging your eyes. But adrenaline, that icy fire running through your veins, keeps you standing, driven by the primal instinct to survive and the holy fury of battle that blinds you to everything else. It is in these moments of hand-to-hand combat where discipline and training make the crucial difference. Unlike many armies of the time, hoplites were trained to fight in close formation, the famous phalanx, to protect themselves from projectiles and to use their weapons in a coordinated manner, maximizing their effectiveness in the chaos of the battlefield. In this instant of blind fury and dancing steel, your mind evokes echoes of legendary battles, tales told around campfires, where Spartan valor shone with unforgettable intensity. You remember, for example, the Battle of Thermopylae back in 480 BC. Imagine, hoplite, that you are not in this blood-stained quagmire, but in the narrow pass of Thermopylae, holding back Xerxes' immense Persian horde. Leonidas, a name that resonates with power and sacrifice, has positioned your 300 Spartan brothers and their Greek allies as an unbreakable wall. You see yourself, not as this mud-covered warrior, but as another hoplite, sweating under the Greek sun, clutching your aspis, shoulder to shoulder with your brothers. You feel the palpable tension in the air, the certainty that a decisive battle is approaching, one that will mark history forever. You hear the shouts of the Persians resounding from the mountains, the projectiles they desperately hurl, and the silent determination of your Spartan companions. Then the roar intensifies. It is not just the shouts from the mountains, but the clamor of the Persian vanguard, charging again and again. You are on the front line, fighting fiercely against waves of enemy warriors, trying to break through the pass. You see Leonidas leading the defense, his crimson crest waving as he carves a path through enemy ranks. You feel the clash of shields, the impact of spears, the cries of the wounded around you. The battle is a chaotic confusion, a whirlwind of men and weapons where Spartan discipline and superior training are your only advantages. You remember your instructor's teachings, the importance of maintaining the phalanx, of advancing with your dory for hand-to-hand combat. You fight shoulder to shoulder with your comrades, trusting the man next to you to protect your flank. For endless days, the battle rages in the pass. You see men fall on both sides, the earth soaking with blood. But Spartan determination does not falter. Leonidas, with his unwavering will, sends the allies to resist, harangues his troops, and maintains pressure on the enemy, knowing that sacrifice is the greatest honor. Finally, Greek resistance begins to yield, not from weakness, but from betrayal, the mountain path that allows them to surround your position. The Persian army, though decimated, manages to advance, but the 300 Spartans and the Thespians remain, fighting to their last breath. This memory, hoplite, instills new determination in you amidst the current battle. Although the enemy and the terrain are different, the spirit of the phalanx, the unbreakable discipline, and the thirst for victory or a glorious death that your ancestors demonstrated at Thermopylae also burn in your heart. You know that like them, you will fight to your last breath, carrying the glory of Sparta with you in every strike of your spear. You narrowly dodge an enemy scimitar strike, feel the cutting wind brush the engraved surface of your helmet, and respond with a downward slash of your xiphus that blinds your attacker's leg. You see him fall to the ground with a muffled cry, writhing in pain in the blood-stained mud, prey to the enraged multitude of your comrades, advancing relentlessly, their spears thirsty for more blood. The battle is a macabre dance, a whirlwind of death where only the strongest, most skilled, and most fortunate manage to survive until the end, until the last enemy falls or flees in terror. Finally, after hours that seem an eternity, the clamor of battle begins to subside. The war cries fade, replaced by the pitiful groans of the wounded and the chilling silence of the dead. The battlefield, once a whirlwind of fury, is now a dantesque expanse sown with inert bodies, mutilated limbs, and remnants of shattered armor. The stench of death is now the dominant aroma. With a sore body, a dented breastplate covered in others' blood, you slowly return to camp, your exhausted but faithful formation leading you through the desolation. The sun begins to set on the horizon, painting the sky with reddish hues that reflect in the pools of blood. The camp, once a hive of activity, is now plunged into a somber silence, interrupted only by the laments of the wounded being hastily tended to and the prayers of the priests for fallen souls. Fatigue weighs on you like a gravestone, but in your eyes, there is a glimmer of survival, the indelible mark of having danced with death and returned to the light of a new day, although you know that tomorrow, or perhaps the day after, the dance will begin again. Here is the continuation of the story, adapted to the life of a Spartan soldier, delving into the final destiny and the end of this imaginary journey, the hoplite's end, an early death and oblivion. By this point in your Spartan dream journey, you have managed to avoid the plague of lice, the persistent companionship of leeches, if you fell ill, the misery of an existence with hardly any hygiene, and the constant threat of brutal punishment for a minor infraction, not to mention the danger of terrible battles. But now the final chapter approaches, the most common destiny in Spartan life, an early and usually inglorious death outside the battlefield. If in this world of sleepy fantasy you find yourself alive and still breathing after 40 years, consider yourself practically a respected elder in the camp. Let's coldly analyze the numbers. The average life expectancy hovered around 30 or 40 years. But that number was drastically skewed by terrifying infant mortality. Almost half of all Spartan children did not reach their 5th birthday. A common disease, chronic malnutrition, or a particularly relentless winter was all it took to cut short a young life, without vaccines offering protection, without antibiotics fighting infections, without the slightest hope of effective medical intervention. If you managed to survive childhood and the agoge, you entered adulthood already exhausted, marked by privations and early work. The workday began as soon as you could hold a cephas and a 20 of your joints cracked. You had probably lost several teeth in fights or from infections, perhaps a finger in a training accident, and surely most of your original optimism had vanished like morning dew. Spartan women faced a particularly deadly trial: childbirth. It was one of the main causes of death for women, without analgesics to mitigate the lacerating pain, without medical interventions that could save lives. Only fervent prayer with hot water poultices and the hand of an experienced midwife holding hers as they bled out on a straw bed. For men, the dangers were different, but equally relentless. Brutal training accidents in the agoge, infections that spread rapidly from minor wounds, the blind fury of a drunken companion in a trivial dispute, or the random fate of a battle that went terribly wrong. Even a simple reconnaissance mission could be a risky undertaking if you encountered bandits and bored helots looking for easy victims or a bad-tempered E4. Death could also come silently, spreading like a dark shadow from the plague that turned entire camps into silent cemeteries overnight, or from devastating famine that could last entire seasons, decimating entire companies and leaving behind a landscape of desolation, or simply from pure bad luck, like consuming contaminated rations and spending the last hours of your existence hallucinating feverishly and screaming at the empty walls of your barracks. And as for funerals, you could consider yourself lucky if you got one. Bodies were often buried hastily in mass graves to prevent the spread of diseases without embalming, to preserve the remains without polished sarcophagi, to honor the deceased. Only a hastily dug hole. Some murmured prayers to the wind and a shallow mound of earth, if there was enough space in the crowded camp burial site. Curiously for a Spartan, the only named gravestone was for those who died in battle, a distinction of supreme honor. For the rest, anonymity. The memory of their sacrifices was kept alive through the tales of their comrades and the annals of the phalanxes. So, if in the Spartan era life was brutal, short, and constantly besieged by death in all its often inexplicable and random forms, there was no retirement. You simply stopped appearing one day, victim of the relentless dance of life and death. And speaking of endings, let your imagination slowly fade, reaching the last moment of this immersion in Spartan life. The Spartan dream ends. So think for an instant about how this imaginary day has been. You woke up in the dirt of the shared barracks? Did your business in a smelly ditch? Tried uselessly to clean your teeth? Almost fainted from hunger? Fulfilled your duties until your body begged for mercy? Suffered the torture of the rough wool chiton that itched incessantly? Prayed fervently to the gods not to fall in battle, and barely avoided brutal punishment for a minor offense? Welcome to a single day, condensed and somewhat exaggerated in Spartan Greece of military campaigns. Do you still dream of being a brave hoplite with shining linen armor? Think again. That idealized version of Sparta, with gallant heroes, courting noble ladies on grand estates, heroic battles fought with honor, and sumptuous banquets in torchlit central courtyards is a myth polished by poets who told stories of heroes and courtly tales. In truth, the Spartan world on campaign was harsh, cruel, and deeply unfair, especially for the helots. And perioikoi social hierarchy was everything, an unbreakable chain that tied the destiny of each person from birth. If you were born a hoplite, your destiny was constant service, discipline, and the possibility of a glorious death in combat. If you were born a perioikos or helot, your destiny was servitude, poverty, and forced labor. Even nobles were not immune to misery. Their imposing estates were cold, drafty places of stone, filled with fleas and smoke, and their marriages were often cold political arrangements without affection. Sure, they could have an animal skin to warm themselves and a cup of watered-down wine, but they also faced half the chance of dying in a small, meaningless fight or from a lost spear. It was not exactly a paradise of luxury and comfort. Those simpler times were not simple at all. They were relentless and demanding. Everything required more time and effort. Everything hurt more. And every action from childbirth to the simple act of chewing hard. Bread could have serious consequences. Life was a constant struggle for survival, not pleasant leisure. And if you found a moment of tranquility to reflect, to dream of something better, to imagine a different future, there was not much you could do about it without real possibilities of social ascent. For most, without the help of modern medicine, without being able to look in old books. What this strange rash is, they lived, suffered, worked, and died near the polis, or the village where they had been born. It is important to remember that while Spartan society was based on a military structure and rigorous education, this did not guarantee a life of comfort or security beyond discipline. Life remained a constant struggle against disease, scarcity, and violence. But herein lies the most surprising and moving paradox. Despite all these unimaginable difficulties, people still laughed heartily. In the Syssitia, sang sad songs around campfires after battle, gathered to tell stories of bravery and loss, fell passionately in love under the moonlight, and found meaning and purpose. Even in the most difficult circumstances, they did not do so because life was easy or fair, but because human nature is intrinsically resilient and stubborn. Even in the darkest moments of its history, they managed to create small spaces for light and hope in this brutal tapestry of Spartan life, where existence itself was a constant test of endurance. The figure of Leonidas emerges. He was not just a king or a simple commander, he was the embodiment of the Spartan spirit, the ideal to which every hoplite aspired in the heat of battle and in the stillness of the agoge. If you have felt the cold of the night on campaign, the hunger in your stomach, and the edge of the sword in your hands, then you can begin to understand what forged men like him. Leonidas was not born in the golden cradle of luxury or in the idleness of nobility from his childhood. Like every Spartan male fit for service, he was torn from his home. At the tender age of 7, to enter the agoge, the rigorous military and physical education that would mold him. Imagine years of iron, discipline, where every day was a lesson in survival. Learning to endure pain with stoicism, to master the art of war with spear and shield, until they became extensions of his own body, to become part of an unbreakable unit. A phalanx where loyalty to the polis and to the comrade in arms was more valuable than life itself. There was no distinction in training for the future king. He sweated, bled, and fought side by side with the other paids Irenes and Hippias. This experience imbued him with a deep understanding of every man under his command, of their limits, of their fears, and crucially, of their unbreakable strength. This connection forged in the crucible of the Agoge gave him an authority that went beyond royalty. It was the authority of the supreme warrior, of the most proven comrade in arms. His name, which means son of a lion, would resonate with legendary force in the defiles of Thermopylae, before the overwhelming Persian tide that threatened to engulf Greece. Leonidas did not hesitate. Aware that the oracles had predicted the death of a Spartan king to save Hellas, and knowing that the bulk of the Greek army would not arrive in time to present a large-scale defense, he made a decision that would engrave his name in history for eternity, with his 300 elite Spartans men, selected not by their lineage, but by their courage and experience in countless battles, and a handful of brave Greek allies. He set out to defend the narrow pass. To the last breath, it was not a mission of military victory in the traditional sense, but of sacrifice. It was the definitive act of a Spartan at his finest, to die gloriously for his homeland, with the unwavering awareness that his death would not be in vain, but would inspire all of Greece to resist Persian tyranny on the battlefield. Leonidas was a whirlwind of discipline and ferocity. He did not stay in the rear. Directing, he was at the very heart of the phalanx, with his spear wielded and his shield defending his flank, fighting with the same brutal efficiency as his men. His orders were not shouted from a distance but left behind. Are the sweet scents of incense and the whispers of the Delphic oracles. In this time, hoplite. The spear's edge dictated destiny, and death's icy scythe danced in every battle. Taking brave and cautious alike, each new sun was a gift, a constant trial, burning in the heart of every man and every woman of Sparta. Before you settle in, take a moment to give the video a good like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who joins us from all over the world. I am the Night Historian, and my goal is for this story to immerse you in a unique experience while you fall into a good sleep. Open your eyes, comrade. It's the year 480 BC. The shadow of Xerxes hangs over our lands. Blink and let your pupils adjust to the gloom of your barracks.